Welcome. I'm Frank Conkling, and this is Panic Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. Today, we're going to look at and start and begin a journey in which we're going to go and introduce everyone to Arcade. And I say begin the journey because this is the very, very beginning, and we're going to start out very simple. And then in coming workshops, we'll go dig deeper and get more and more complex and see if we can explore as much as we can. But today, hopefully you don't expect too much, and hopefully I don't leave too many people behind, but this will be a very simple introduction, those people that aren't programmers. So let's start on here and just go through a couple things. Just again, remind you who we are. We're Panic Consulting. You want to find out more about us, you can go to our website. Actually, you can click on the URL code that's on the slide right here, or take a picture of it with your camera and it'll direct you right there. We are in our 25th year. We're blessed by being able to go and help all of you, and we appreciate that, and we want to continue for many more years. If you want to know what's coming up, you can go to the events page on our website. That's actually listed in a calendar view. And I'm starting to extend out, not just when our workshops are, but where we're going to be. We also have a different way of listing it. If you go over to the workshop page, it actually will give you a listing of the events in a linear fashion, so you can see all the past events and actually get links where you can actually click on them. It actually takes you over to YouTube, or you can actually download the entire recording in a higher resolution. And this is our YouTube page. We now have, I think, 75 or so different videos up here, covering almost everything that has to deal with ArcGIS Pro and the parcel fabric. So please reach out, let us know if there's anything that we can do to help you, and we appreciate it. Also, before I move further onto this, just sort of a reminder, Chris is going to be moderating. And if you have any questions or any comments you'd like to put in there, he's in the chat window. So those of you that are attending have another resource here. Please, if you have any questions, please put them up there. I have no problem stopping and sort of making sure that we really get you to understand this as we're going through. So let's start then. So what is Arcade? Those of us that have made the transition into ArcGIS Pro, or they're thinking about ArcGIS Pro, have heard this Arcade language being talked about a lot. And it's because it's become not just ubiquitous, but it is important. It is used throughout Esri's newer technologies. It's used in ArcGIS Pro. It's used in ArcGIS Online, on hosted feature services, in labeling. It's used for formatting. It's used for calculations, for evaluating. It's all sorts of things in here. It has not just replaced what we used to use VB Script for. It's actually gone and surpassed that. And it's a very, very robust, continues to be improved. Every single release, there's continues to be enhancements in it. But it goes, and it's one of those things where if you want to go and utilize Pro, you really need to at least understand what's going on here. All right, so let's start. Let's start with this. This is Esri's page, and here is the actual URL link over to it. There's a QR code if you want to take a picture of it, but I'm going to go and open that up for you here. And this is what the Esri page looks like. And I have to give big thumbs up for this. They have completely rewritten all of their help for Arcade, and it is a really good help format. You'll see a lot of the information I have is a result of this. Those of us that started using Arcade early on, we realized that there wasn't a lot of documentation. Well, they've gone above and beyond that now. Everything from all the different features of the language, how you create statements and comments and all of these things on here, to release notes, what it's supported in as far as supported, how portable it is, what you can use it in. And in addition, if you go over here on the right-hand side of it, there's the playground. Now, the playground is really, really important. And it's the place that you can come in here, and as it kind of makes sense, it's a place for you to play and for test and to sort of try out the code. And you see a version of this playground on the ArcGIS Online sites when you start putting expressions in there and start building arcade there. And it's actually got some intelligence built into it now, which is really good. Esri's done a really good job with this. So let's go back here to this first and just sort of look at it. And so what is this? What's a statement? A statement is actually the beginning of the expression. And it can be really, really simple. It can be something as simple as this right here, hello world. If you put text in quotes, it's interpreted as being a quote. And then, by the way, this is a comment after it. It has a double forward slash. And then it's just telling you that what this is going to do is this is going to go and return back to you, hello world. And just to go and prove that, we can go and put hello world in here. And when I hit test on here, it will go and sure enough, that's the results. It's going to go and do that. And there's a couple things important about that you need to understand. That in fact, it's interpreting that as text. And more importantly, there's this return. What is it going to return back to you when it evaluates the expression? Because it's really what we're doing. We're writing expressions for it to go and evaluate and to calculate things on and then tell us what the results of that is. So to build on the statements, you can have multiple statements on one line, or you can separate them. In this case, we're going to go and create one. And at the ends of it, if you're having multiple lines in there, you put a semicolon at the end. And what we're doing here, and we'll talk about variables and what they mean, is we're creating one variable and we're defining the variable, but just by calling it out, saying variable X is equal to the number 3. And look, there's a semicolon. And then variable Y is equal to number 4. These are both numbers. And then we can say, return to us the value when X is added to Y. And that plus sign is equal to a concatenate or an add, depending upon what type of data you're working on. And it will return to you 7. So let's go back here again to this and go through this. And this is a really interesting thing about arcade. So I can say, let's take 5, and then we'll put a plus in here. And we'll say, let's add it to 10. Let's do a test. Say, okay, what is this? And you'll note it adds up this. So it automatically knows that, in fact, that is a number and returns a number. However, watch what happens when we go in here and we say plus, and we're going to put some text on the end of this. Plus, and notice when I did a single double quote, it added another one at the other end of it. So there is some intelligence in here. Text test. All right. So now when I do a test, oh, look at what's happening here. It is taking the numbers and adding the numbers up. And then it's taking the text and adding the text up and then returning back to us a number. It's smart enough to understand the difference between numbers and mathematical operands against those numbers and pieces of text. So it learns how to go and it understands how to go and handle number components and how to handle text components on here and to aggregate them together. So for example, if something on here, I might want to say, well, let's put a space here and then test it again so that it actually will put a space in here. And we're going to play around with this a little bit more. But this right here is a very important component on here in that depending upon whether you're dealing with numbers or dealing with text, you really don't have to declare the type of data that you're working with. Arcade automatically goes and evaluates it and figures out what is it that you're trying to do on here. So for example, when we utilize these things on things like labels, we can mix numbers and text in there, and it will automatically generate the text that's required for that label. If, however, we're doing calculations, depending upon whether we add text to the evaluation or whether it's pure numbers, that's what the result's going to be on here. All right, so again, we're dealing with statements on here, and we can have a series of statements. Again, this is a multi-part. Here's one line, here's another line, here's another line on here, and then this is a comment on here. All right, so let's talk about keywords. There are certain keywords in here that are reserved, and they actually, the arcade engine goes and interprets when you have one of these, and interprets what else you're going to do or how it should proceed. Most of these you're not going to get involved with initially, but as you get into more complex expressions, then you'll start looking at them. For example, you can introduce a break in the execution of the statements while you're in a for loop. A for loop is a conditional loop that tells you how many, what you should do as long as something is occurring on here. And for is one of the keywords. Else is another one. So there's an if-else loop, or there's a while loop. A var, a variable, that's a declaration for a variable. So you can determine and create a variable. We'll talk about variables here in a minute. This one here is most important, a return. A return indicates that you're finished with this statement that it's evaluating, and it should return that value and give it back to the program. Somehow, somewhere, it should go and do that. So again, by the way, this page is in the documentation for Esri, and it's again very, very helpful, and it'll show you how to go and link over to different functions and what they're doing. For those of us that are involved in programming a little bit more, there you can define your own function within Arcade, and that's what this function is, to allow you to begin the definition of a set of code or a set of statements that you want to use over and over and over again. That's a function. All right, so a comment, okay? A comment is text that's ignored by the Arcade engine when it's analyzing these statements, but it's used to document the expression. And the comments are preceded by 2 forward slashes. So, for example, this is a comment. I can tell you, like most people, I hate commenting. Usually I'm just so involved in the stream, but if you're going to share Arcade expressions with anybody else, it's a really good idea to document what's going on. And as you get into more complexity, you realize you really do want to start documenting and sort of figuring out so you can come back and troubleshoot them later. Now, here's an interesting thing that I wasn't even aware of, that you can actually create multiple line comments by enclosing them with a forward slash and then an ampersand, and then closing it off with an ampersand on here. So here you can have a multiple line comment here. It starts with this, and then it's going in each of these, and then it's closing with this. Previously, I was just putting double forward slashes on each of these, but you can actually have a multi-line comment in here to define what a certain block is doing or give you a better comment area that you can work with. So again, comments, start to use them. Okay, return. What is a return? All Arcade expressions require that they return a value. Every expression has to return a value. But there's two types of returns. There's an explicit return in which you actually use the word returned on there. And you tell it return this. That's what's going on here. And from a programming standpoint, that sort of is a good way to indicate, oh, I'm done with this. Let me see what the results are of when you evaluated my expression. There's also what's called an implicit return. All right. And basically it's just you put it in there, you hit return, you hit return. You put it in there, it evaluates it, it gives you that value. So to show you again, this is, again, I can just do 25 times 5. And when I just hit test, that is an explicit return. Not that, sorry. It will give me the value, or I could tell it return 25 times 5, and it does the same thing. So it will return that value in there for me on here. No questions yet? All right, let's talk about then variables. And variables are really, really important in that think of a variable as being sort of a container that you can put things in and keep working on them and putting things in there. And then at the end, you can say, okay, show me what's in my container. All right. There are places to store values, and you declare them with just by saying variable, and then you declare what that name is, and then tell it what you want to call it. And this is interesting because it's different from other programming languages in that you don't have to tell it what type of variable it is. You don't have to declare a string variable or a number variable or double or whatever. You can just say, this is a variable, and start throwing things in. And Arcade, as I demonstrated earlier, will understand, is it a number? Is it a text? Or as we get into more complex things, is it an array? What are you going to do with this? So there's all sorts of things you can do with it. So you can just declare it by saying a var and then what the name of it is. You don't even have to go and set it to something. You can just set it to say, declare it, and it can go and start using that variable to start putting things into that container. Now, there are some rules. The variable has to begin with a number or with a letter, not a number. It has to begin with a letter. And then it can only contain letters, numbers, or underscores. It doesn't have to contain all of them, but it can only contain those things in there. It can't contain plus signs or division signs or anything like that. And then finally, it cannot match any of the reserved words that are in here. And if we go back here, these are some of the reserved words. There's others, but these are some of the reserved words, and you'll get an error if you try to go and start it with that. So how do you start naming them? How do you start doing it? I tend to try to name them so it's meaningful to me. And I also use a sort of a convention in which I will go and either start, if I have, for example, in this case, start date, I might make the S uppercase and the D uppercase so I can look at it and my mind interprets that as being, oh, that's two words, but it's a single variable, and I'll look at it that way. Just personal preferences on this. So let's look at this, okay? So let's go and declare a couple things here. Let's create a variable, and we'll call it equal to 25. And then we'll put a semicolon. Remember, a semicolon goes and separates lines in here. And I'll declare a second variable. By the way, let me go in. That's variable A. That's variable B. And this is 5. All right. And then I can tell it that A times B on here, and tell it it's 125. Or I could have said return A times B, make it 25. Or I could tell it on here, if I even want to get more fancy, I could create a variable C that's equal to A times B. And then I could tell it here, return C, and I could put a semicolon there. And
Frank, we do have a question in the chat.
okay, go ahead.
Do you have spaces in your script, and will it work without them?
It will. Let me go in and demonstrate that. So in here, there's some really interesting things about Arcade. For example, I have, in order for it to be a little bit more legible, what I've done is I've separated this onto different lines. I put spaces between things. However, I can start changing that. For example, I can go and do this. All right. One of the interesting things about this is that this will work just as well as anything else. And I tell it to go ahead and return this. It actually will interpret that expression all on a single line and still calculate, still execute exactly as it is. And then you get into spaces. Well, what happens if I go and put I remove the space here? I have to have a space between the declaration of the variable and the actual name. But after that, I could go and say A is equal to 25, B is equal to 5, C is equal to A times B, and then return C. And sure enough, it still works. So the spaces are not required. The spaces are primarily for readability, to help you to understand what's going on. I can tell you from experience, you get into some complexity as you start looking more and more and more at Arcade, and that you can build some very, very complex expressions in here, and you want to try to make it as legible as possible for you as you're going through it. So again, from my own experience, it's best to go and get into this mode of writing it so that you have the ability to go and look at it and read what it's attempting to do very easily on here. All right. So we showed you that there's a lot of things that are optional. There are some things that are, no, this is the way you have to do it. If you're going to use a variable, you have to declare it, but you don't have to type it. You don't have to declare what type it is. You just have to declare it and start using it. And it's easy for you to go and use on here. All right. So again, spaces are not required on here. You can do multiple lines. Multiple lines have to be separated by semicolons. All right. Empty lines to break up code even more. Thank you, Mark. Yeah. So that's the other thing that you can do if you want to go and do this. We're just showing you all the ways in which Arcade allows us to break these things up even more. All right, I can use an empty spaces in here like this, and let's show you that this actually is changing. I can redefine B to be equal to 10, and when I do it, automatically will still go and understand what's going on here. If I really want to do it right, I would go and comment set A, and then I would go down here and set B. Multiply A times. You see why everybody goes and balks at documentation because it takes so long. And again, still works. It is very, very flexible and the way it works and what it's doing for you. It lets you, from a programming standpoint, it is not strict at all. It's very flexible. It allows you to kind of cheat sometimes even because, for example, if I go and take these off, what happens? It still returns it. So, you know, it says you're supposed to have semicolons at the end of them. Sometimes you can get away without the semicolons on there, and it'll still work. It interprets the separate line in there as being a semicolon. So there, again, there's a lot of flexibility built into this. What's on here? We have another comment in here.
We do. Can you format the date you entered on a previous slide so it doesn't return the date, including the minute, seconds, and milliseconds?
Okay, I'm going to go and give you a reference to here. So if I look at the future reference here, there is a function for dates, which allows you to go and do formatting in here. So you can tell it what the parameters are and how you want it to go and be formatted. All right, on here. And I'm pretty sure in here, there's a way that you can format this where you tell it you let it go and format what this is actually going to be resulting on. Yeah, there is part of the date function that you can actually go and tell it how you want it to be formatted. There's also, we're getting kind of deep here, more than I wanted to do here, but there's things like I can add dates together. I can see the difference between two dates, and I can tell you what the time is right now on here, or the date right now. So it's a pretty robust language on here. Again, this is an early primer on here, but we're gonna go through a lot of these things. So let's talk about data types. What can you go and work with? There's a data type called a feature. A feature is a single element inside of a layer. And that feature could be a point, it could be a polygon, a line, it could be anything. It's a feature. You want to go and interact with that. So you could tell it to automatically go in and create a bunch of things on each of those individual features that you have selected on here. A feature set is actually a connection to a layer. So this is an individual feature in your data. This is a layer in your data. This is a group of layers or collection of layers inside of here. And then on here, there's things that you can interact with. You can interact with the geometry of a feature. So you can say, show me the XY location of a point. Show me the XY location of a multiple point. Show me the centroid of a polyline, the center of a polyline, or show me the centroid of a polygon. Show me the extent of this feature that's on here. So it allows you to go and have access to the properties of that object that you're working against. And there's all sorts of components in here for that. Just get back here a little bit more. On here, if I look at the functional components on here, there's geometry features, and you'll see these here in a minute. I can calculate the angle of a line. I can calculate the area of a polygon, the bearing of a line. I can do the centroid of a feature. I can find the centroid of a point, the centroid of a line, or centroid of a polygon. I can find the distance. I can find offsets on here. I can find whether they overlay or don't overlay, what the union is, whether or not I have a point within something else. It's a pretty extensive list of things that you can do, and that's just the geometry features. there is a lot in here. There's quite a bit built into this. So let's look at some of these operands. And once we get done with this, we're going to start doing some demos and sort of showing you some of these things, some of these expressions, where you can use them, that sort of thing.
Frank,
So
before you move on, there is one question in the chat.
yes.
If you're working in Pro, typing an arcade expression, did you say that the playground is there, or do they need to go to the online help?
So the playground right now is not available in Pro. We're hoping, I'm hoping, anybody here from Esri, to go that they're going to put it in there real quickly. They just made a great enhancement on the online playground where it actually has what Microsoft calls autocomplete, where as you start typing something in, it will tell you what the options are, what you have to fill in to complete a function. It's really nice what they put on there for ArcGIS Online. And that includes hosted or on-prem, but in Pro, it's not there yet. As you can tell, there's a whole different code base for Pro, but we're hoping it gets there. So to answer your question, no, Playground is not available for ArcGIS Pro yet. We're, like I said, we're hoping for it though. Okay. Okay. So let's look at the different things that we can do with these objects that we're dealing with. So real simple. If we have a number, what can we do with the number? And these are the simple operands, the simple operators. We can add them together. You know, we can subtract them. We can multiply. We can divide. We can return the remainder of a number divided by another number, the modulus. We can increment it by 1. So if we have a list and we want to increment things by 1, it's just increment by 1 here on there. Or we can increment by a variable here. We can decrete or decrement by 1 also. So these are sort of the really simple numeric things in here. Again, as we get into this further and further, we're going to look at all the functions that are associated with numbers that we can use. For example, we can take and calculate things. Well, I'll go in here. We can assign things. For example, we can assign a variable to a certain value. All right. We can add an assignment on here and add whatever's in there. We can subtract it. We can multiply what's in there. We can divide it by in there. So these are assignment operators. We can compare things. We can compare whether or not one thing is equal to something else. In this case, we can evaluate to see is X equal to Y. And what this does is this either returns true or false. The most of the comparisons will tell either true or false. Whether it's not equal to Y, we can do a comparison operator. Whether it's greater than, whether it's greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. So we can begin to use, we can set up variables and then compare them to see whether or not they're equal or not. Logical, this is returning logical expressions, whether or not returns true if one of the two expressions are true, or logical ends. They get more complex. So here's the text functions, and we're going to explore these more. We can go and concatenate two texts together. We can go and say on here, go to our playground, and let's wipe this out, and we'll say A is equal to all right, and then we could say return C. And here it is. So it would help if I had spelled Mary, right? All right. So a concatenate is where you take two text strings and you add them together and make one string out of it. And you can see in here, and again, I purposely did this so that we could start looking at variables and how to use variables and how to return them. All right, so that I declared a variable for A equal to the text contained inside my delimiters. And then I declared B equal to the text inside my delimiters. And then I declared C equal to the concatenation of those two. Notice if I really got slappy, all I really had to do was say here, and do an explicit return. I didn't have to say return. I was implicit in there. I didn't have to declare a variable for it. I didn't need that, but I might have had to use that extra variable for something else as I went down. So it's just a good practice to try to be as clean as possible and not take any shortcuts as you're going through here. All right, so there's things like there's concatenate, there's find, there's the left, there's the lower, there's the right. Let's go explore some of these. So let's go back here and declare C equals to this. All right. And then let's look at a couple of things. Let's look at upper of C. All right. So let's see what happens, some of the text manipulation that we have in here. In this case, I've used a function called upper. And when I do that, it goes and converts everything into uppercase. I can do the same thing and say, no, let's make this lower. All right. That's all lower. Or I can do proper, and it will do proper. Proper case goes and makes uppercase the first of every word in here. So those are just some of the things. But then there's also, I can do things like show me the left of C, and I have to give it a number. The left 2 of C. All right, and there's the left 2 characters of whatever is C on here. So this here, the left, goes and allows me to pick out from that string X number of characters out of it and return that to me. Has the same thing with right. I can do the same thing on the right-hand side, or if I have some space in here. So let's go and do the right. Just sort of demonstrate how this works. There's the right 2 there. I can also, because I have a space here and I have a space here, let's go and put a space at the end of here and put a space at the beginning of this. I can then tell it to trim C. Now what trim will do, trim will eliminate spaces before and spaces after. And let's do this first. Let's just return C. There's C, and if we actually looked at it, there would be a space before and after. If we tell it to go and trim C, it will then go and remove the space before and the space after. And I don't know whether you saw, but I actually moved that over because it took the leading space out. So manipulation here is it allows you to go and change that text in multiple ways, including there's one a little bit more sophisticated here called split, which will allow you to go and split a piece of text into multiple pieces of text using whatever character you tell it is the placement for splitting. So for example, if you had a bunch of text in here, you told it to split it wherever a space appears, it would create an array that had each of those various split components on here. The one I want to go and talk about is this mid one. This one is really interesting, and it's one that for those of us that mid here. So what it's going to do is it's going to take, and I tell it start at a certain position and take so many characters out. But the interesting thing about this is that I'm going to take that space out of here, and I'll take the space out of here. All right. And I'm going to tell it to start at the first position here and to return one character on here. Now, normally I would say, okay, it's going to give me an M, right? But when I do this, it doesn't. It gives me an E. Why does it do this? Because Arcade, one of the interesting characteristics about it, and something that from a programming standpoint, it's not obvious initially, is that it's what's called zero indexed, meaning it doesn't start counting on one when you're trying to do things like mid. It actually starts at 0. So if I go and say, well, no, just start at 0 and turn what's ever there, then I get that. And again, I can go and tell it, well, give me 10 characters starting at 0, and it will go and give me those 10 characters starting at 0. Okay, one more thing. Let's go, and there's one more text manipulation thing that we want to go and talk about. Oh, sorry. So there's a replace function inside of here. Now, this replace function, you tell it the characters or the string values to replace. And let's do this. Make that an R. And then you tell it what to replace it with. All right. So when I go and do this, it's going to replace any instances of MER in C and replace them with MA here. So there it is there. All right. Let's go and to our slides one more time. Math functions, there's a lot of math functions in here. There's everything from the absolute value to the arcsine, arctangents, cosines, the average, the max, the min, the square root, the sum, all of these in here. Again, these are more, these are simple math functions, but you can manipulate these numbers on here. Again, I kind of made reference earlier to geometry. These are a little bit more advanced, and we're going to look at them in future workshops. But just know that we can begin to analyze our expressions, or we can begin to analyze our functions and actually begin to start being able to go and do calculations, things that we used to require geoprocessing tools to go and do, we can now do with Arcade. All right, so let's go and do some demonstrations. I'm going to go and pull up, in this case, this is a parcel fabric, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be simple feature classes. And I've gone and selected out of here 5 individual parcel polygons on here. All right. And these are in a selection layer called demo selection. It's got 5 in here. It's telling me those 5. And now let's go and say, well, let's use this for some calculations. Let's go and calculate. And into this field, I want to calculate in this field using the expression type of Arcade. And now I can start telling it what my Arcade expression is. And the first thing I want to do is get you to understand that there is a special type of word that we reference the features that are inside of here. So if I tell it that I want to use the value that's stored in the parcel number, all right, if I double click on parcel number here, what I will get, by the way, parcel number is an alias If I go over here, you'll see that the actual name is name, but the actual alias on this attribute field is called parcel number. I can go and do that. Mark, good question. I'm going to answer that in a minute. But what this is going to do is, because this is going to work through all of the things that I have selected in this layer, it's going to take the first feature. It's going to take the feature, and then it's going to go and take the value that's stored in a name field. And I'm going to go and say, let's add another space. Let's make it a dash. Let's make it interesting here. And then I'm going to go and add to that a function in which I take the area of this parcel. All right. And that's a geometry function called area of this feature, and calculate it to acres. All right. So again, this is each feature is going to go through and it's going to loop through all of them. If I have a couple selected, it will only do the selected ones. If I have all of them in this layer, it will go through all of them. And first it will go and put the value of the name, and then it will go and put a dash with spaces before and after, and then it will go and put the amount of acres here. All right, I'm going to go and check. It is a valid expression. By the way, when you're first learning, that's really important. Then I'm going to tell it to go ahead and run this. And it's going to go and put it in here. Hopefully I didn't overrun this length here. While it's doing that, Mark, you have a question regarding, can the centroid feature return the latitude and longitude of the actual feature that it's evaluating? And the answer is, it depends. Okay. Depends on whether or not the projection that's defined, the spatial reference for that feature class, is defined as being a planar projection or a spherical projection. All right. So by the way, we'll note that this thing did the value that's stored here, then it put a dash there, and then it gave it the number of acres. But note, it's not rounded. It carries it all the way out. So I will go and tell it to round, and I'm going to include in quotes this value to 2. And I'm going to tell it to go ahead and execute again. You'll go and execute again. Go ahead and do that. So Mark, hopefully, yeah, there's limitations on returning lat and long. Even returning XY values, it depends upon what the projection actually is on here. All right. So as you can see, this now went and returned the value of the area of that feature in acres, rounded to 2 decimal places. And if I really want to get smart, I can tell it, let's go and add a space AC. So add some text on the end of this. So in which case it's now should go and put that same value in here. On here. Yeah, one of the things that I'm hoping in the future we can do is actually have it return projected or other spatial references on here. But right now it's pretty simplistic what it can do on here. But it's amazing what it can do up to that point. So what you've seen is I've gone and used Arcade to calculate the name of the parcel and a dash and the actual acreage rounded to 2 decimal places with some text added onto it. Now, here's where I start telling you and showing you, here's where Arcade is so ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So if I go in here, I'm going to take this code. right here, and I'm going to copy it. All right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my parcel layer and I'm going to configure the pop-up. All right. I'm going to configure the pop-up, and on here, I'm going to add an expression. This is an arcade expression. I'm going to tell it, I'm just going to call it, let's leave it at expression there. I'm going to put that in here. Okay, there's my expression. Now I've stored an expression. Now let me go in here and add what I'm going to put in. Well, if I note down here, it has on the bottom that expression that I just added on here. So when I go and click on a parcel, it will run that expression. Let me go and do a pop-up on all visible layers. And let's go over to this parcel here. And let me use the Explorer tool instead. When I click on this, it's now going to go and give me all that, and then it's going to put here that expression. Didn't change any of the expression, didn't change anything in there. I just told it to go and take this and put it into the pop-up. All right, same exact code. It runs everywhere. So now I can go and do another thing. I can say, well, maybe instead of just that, maybe we want to go and do a label on here. And let's go to our label expressions and let's tell it to go and put this in here. And this class is the, let's do it the partial class. Let's apply that. So now if we go and turn on our labeling for this, for the parcel class, let's tell it to go and do it anywhere, anytime. There it is. And let's turn on our labels here. So it will go and provide that label now. Same arcade expression going everywhere I wanted it to go. So again, arcade is ubiquitous throughout here. And the only time you have to change code is if you're moving from pro to online, and those changes are minor. And in the coming workshops, I'll show you how and when you have to make those changes in here. So a couple more things. That was, I showed you in a calculations, in a pop-up, in a label. Let's look at something a little bit more intense.
Before you move on, Frank, we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Go ahead.
The first one is the conversion embedded in the text acres within the area function.
Yes. So yes, it is. So there are predefined global functions on here. And if we go here, just in here, if I go to area to show you on here, I have area and it has predefined the parameters for what it returns. I can return acres, square feet, hectares, square kilometers, square meters, square nautical miles, square meters, square yards on here. Those are predefined so that all I have to do is tell it that I want to calculate the area and what I want to return on it. Again, if we go here, what this actually is saying is, let's go back to here. Here's the portion of it. It says calculate or return the area of that feature, but return it as acres. So that is predefined. I don't have to do anything for it. It knows what projection it is. It knows what the units are. It doesn't matter. It will define back to you and reply back to you what the actual formula is between them. Okay. So
one more question.
Okay.
Would you have to do an expression if you already calculated the value into a field?
No, I mean, again, the only reason I did that was to just demonstrate the ubiquity of arcade on here. No, the answer is you don't have to do that if you want to go and automatically have that pop up. However, now let me start asking the question, why would you want to store that? Because that might be dynamic. Maybe there's some other things going on here. What you want to do is, because of the way you can use Arcade now, you start evaluating, do you have to store all of these things and recalculate them constantly? All right. Do you have to go and do that? You might say yes, you might say no. It comes down to sort of part of your design. And I'm going to show you now one of the things why. So in here, again, I came up with an expression and said, okay, I want to go and put this in this case, I'm going to put this in a parcel map field. So I'm going to create an attribute rule. Now, an attribute rule, I'm going to go and take this attribute rule, and I'm going to go and tell it to automatically go and populate a field as I create something. All right, so let me go and expand this a little bit more. Let's go and add a new field. And I'm just going to call this demo. All right, and on here, I'm going to tell it in demo to go and calculate the map ID, which is the one that I just was putting it in. And I'm going to paste in. There's that arcade rule. And that arcade rule is going to populate it with the name that's stored in that value. And it's going to round out the acreage to 2. And it's going to add this in here. I'm going to say here. And then I'm going to go back down. And I'm going to say, go and trigger this attribute rule when I create it or when I modify it. When I go and update the shape here, I'm going to save this. And this is in my parcel. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create a new parcel, and you can see how it's going to automatically populate that field for me. So by the way, attribute rules are stored in the actual database, and they're part of ArcGIS Pro definition. If you have an attribute rule, you no longer can read that feature class in ArcMap. ArcMap does not understand what that thing is. So just sort of as a piece of caution. All right, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to create a new parcel. And this new parcel here, all right, I'm going to create that new parcel. But if you note on here, it automatically created this portion of it. Well, if I go and add this as my name on here, not only does that attribute rule go and copy the value into this parcel ID, but it also recalculated that attribute rule of what that value is. So let me go in here one more time. Let's use the select tool. Let's go in here and edit the vertices on here, and you're going to watch me go now and change this geometry. And as I change the geometry, it's actually going to go and recalculate the acreage and repopulate that attribute field on here. Wow. We covered all of that already today. So we covered what Arcade can do, simple examples of what we're doing with it. We looked at some text manipulation in here. We looked at how we can add things together. We looked at how we can define a variable and then use variables as we go through here. We put a lot in here. So we then went and took that and did a calculation on a field. We also took that same arcade code, put it into an expression, use that same arcade code, put it in a label, and then finally put it into an attribute rule. We could take that same arcade code and put it online if we wanted to, so that some of these things would automatically start calculating and being valuable for us and easier for us to do. As we always say, let the software work for you. Don't work and do all the work for the software. All right. This is the first of many different arcade workshops we're going to have. Next time, we're going to get a little bit deeper. We'll start looking at evaluating relationships between features, how they relate to one another, and start looking at things like being able to go and do intersections. And real quickly, let me see if I can pull up real quickly some code here for you to give you just a little tease on what we might be able to do in the future. I probably should have had this set up beforehand. Here we go. One of the things we can do, for example, is this, where we can have arcade go, and as we're here, we could have it go and click on a parcel. And when we click on the parcel, have it go and return to us what soil layers it intersected, how many of the individual types of soils were included in here, and calculate what the acreage is for each of those as it intersects one parcel against the entire soil layer on here using arcade. That's some of the things we're going to cover in the future. All right. So are there any questions real quickly? Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.